Hi there, and welcome back to Good Distinctions. I'm your host, Will Wright, and Good Distinctions are the spice of life. I'm here today with Nicole Delaney, JCL, who is with the Diocese of Phoenix in the Tribunal. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So first, like I do with all my guests, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my. So yes, I am a canon lawyer for the Diocese of Phoenix. My official title, I guess, is Director of the Office of Canonical Services and the Tribunal, which is a fancy way of saying if it's canon law, I probably do it. I've been here for almost 15 years, working for the diocese. I received my canon law licentiate from the Catholic University of America, and then did my theology, which is required before canon law at the Angelicum in Rome. And I'm married and have a couple kids, and not bored, we'll just say.
I would guess not. I don't know half of what goes on downtown, but I know that the office is always busy. There's
Indeed.
always things going on.
Yes.
Earlier, when I was working in parish ministry, I was a trained nullity minister at the diocese and went to a couple of trainings that you had done. That's how we met years ago. And I think about 60% or more of what I know about canon law, I learned from you. So thank you for that. It's come in handy. I'll give the rest to Father Chris Fraser, the judicial vicar, and then some other readings I've done. But there's a lot to canon law. It covers the full gamut of the Christian life. And so I guess we'll start with an easy, slow pitch softball question. What is canon law for?
Ooh, everything is the short answer. So I do a lot of training of transitional deacons, permanent deacons, priests, and I always tell them, you have 3 books that you have to have. You have to have the Bible, you have to have the Catechism, and you have to have the Code. They all work together and in tandem with each other. So the Word of God, you have the teachings of the Church, and then canon law is where the rubber hits the road. How does our faith work in action? How do we organize ourselves? How do we protect our rights? How do we protect the sacraments? How do we do the day-to-day? We are a human institution run by humans. And I also like to say, as long as we need the sacrament of confession, we're going to need law, because we need direction, and that's a good thing. It's not something to bind our hands. It's actually knowing the parameters gives us freedom. And that is the point. And as the last canon of the Code says, the highest law of the Church is the salvation of souls. So what canon law's aim is in everything, those of us who work for the Church, those of us who are in ministry, what is the Church for? Also, its laws are for the salvation of souls. So keeping that in front of your mind is always helpful. But yeah, that's the gist of canon law.
Well, this is a much broader topic that we probably won't get into, but I feel like it's worth mentioning is that canon law is the code of canon law rather is it was promulgated in 1980 from a multi-volume code from 1917, if I have that right. 1914.
Well, no, it was
17?
one code in 1917. In fact, the 17 code was our first comprehensive code, but it was a lot bigger. Like we did simplify it quite a bit when we did the 1983 code, but it was prior to 1917 that we had kind of laws, not kind of everywhere, but being a canon lawyer was a little more difficult than it is today, where you have a lot more cohesive, organized system.
Well, and it is a system. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to have you speak on briefly is just that it is law, right? It's a code of law, a system of law, parallel, tangential, overlap. How would you describe it as far as the interplay with civil law?
Okay. Well, ours is a lot older than American civil law. First of all, we're running in 2 different kinds of legal systems. So Americans, we know common law from English common law, which is very different than Roman law, which is what the Code of Canon Law and the Church's law is based off of. We grew up in a Roman society. Even words that we use, the languages that we use is all from the Romans. We even took their legal structures. So since the beginning of our church, we have had laws. They even predate the church. If you look at the Old Testament, that's full of law.
Mhm.
And anything still useful is used today. And if you look at the New Testament, it's also full of laws. It was a church trying to figure itself out and organize itself, and a lot of those things that we still use today. But it is a Roman legal system, which is nothing like an American common law system. So I
Mhm.
am barred in the laws of the church if you want to use civil law language, but I'm
Mhm.
barred by the Pope. Essentially, the Catholic Church has its own law schools and has for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Even how we've developed procedural law, which we took from the Romans. Really, modern law takes from the Romans and through us because we preserved Roman law.
Mhm.
So it's very ancient, very useful. And again, in many ways, civil lawyers would be like, oh, we do that. It's like, well, yeah, but we did it first. Well, the Romans did it first, but yeah. Um, but we don't work with jurisprudence, like you hear that if you watch LA Law or whatever shows are on right now. Like we don't, what a judge says doesn't necessarily rule. So it is a
Mhm.
different system of law. Our legislator is the Pope. Okay, so I don't think a lot of people think of Pope Francis as being a legislator, but he's actually legislated more in his pontificate than definitely Benedict did. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't say JP2 and Benedict combined, but maybe there's a lot of law going on under Francis.
In just under 10 years.
Oh,
I mean, it's like constant.
it's constant. I mean, he keeps me on my toes. In fact, the Canon Law Society has reprinted the code three times, twice,
Mhm.
three times since in his pontificates. So I mean, he is very interested in promulgating law. And then your diocesan bishop is also a legislator, but we don't vote on laws in the church like they do in the United States, or have a
Mhm.
legislative body. The legislator is the Pope or your diocesan bishop. So it is a different system of law, but again, other countries still use a Roman form of law. France, for example, uses a code that's very similar. We actually based our code of canon law on the Napoleon's code from the 19th century,
Mhm.
but very different if you're familiar with American common law.
Hmm. Well, and as far as the Pope being the legislator and the adjudicator of the church, he can write a motu proprio and change canon law by his own hand, literally by his own power, right? So it doesn't take an act of the Roman Rota to change law, but I'm sure that happens too. Like how many different sources do you have to watch on a daily basis to make sure that you're getting all the newest
Yeah, well, it's
stuff?
actually a lot easier than you think because the Pope literally is the only legislator. The Rota is
Okay,
just a court. And
got
so,
it.
like I said, American law, you would look to a court for law, but you can't here.
Hmm.
Our only legislator is the Pope. So the Roman Rota is the basically the highest court in the church and is the Pope's court. So you can send appeals and they have jurisdiction over certain types of cases, but they don't get to legislate. And
Hmm.
for us canonists, we use what they write in their sentences they do as good jurisprudence, but
Gotcha.
it's not law. So it's
Interesting.
nice, actually. It makes it a
Yeah.
little more simple.
So I think most people, even if they're not Catholic, are at least familiar with the term annulments. And I know we've talked about that on Good Distinctions before, and I'll probably do an entire episode at some point. Actually, if you're willing, I'd love to have you back on. We can maybe just talk about that. But
Sure.
I'd like to avoid that for the most part today because
Sure.
I think most people are familiar. Okay, an annulment is not a Catholic divorce. It's when a marriage is investigated at the time of consent and the time leading up to when consent is exchanged, when the people say I do. And it's saying, okay, was there some serious impediment so that the marriage was not valid ever, like to begin with? And this is a whole court. Some people will say, okay, well, it's an investigation of the man and the woman, and no, it's an investigation of the marriage. And
Mhm.
so all of that, then it goes to the tribunal, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen, and there's judges that sift through everything, and the defender of the bond to argue for the sacrament of matrimony. And so it's this Holy Spirit led thing, ideally, hopefully,
Hopefully.
to come with a sentence, or I don't know if sentence is the right word, but a
It
pronouncement,
is.
a proclamation
Mhm. It is a
saying,
fun.
yes, this is declared null, or no, it is not. So that aside,
Mhm.
what else does the tribunal do? What else does the Office of Canonical Services do?
Lots. But yeah, you're right. I think most people just think of, if you're going to be a canon lawyer, you're going to do annulments. Well, yeah, that's a lot of the work in this country, for good or for ill. But like I opened up as saying that our entire structure of the church is canon law. And so a bishop, oh, I am so sorry. You might want to cut out that part, but anyways,
I didn't even hear anything.
Oh, you didn't? My phone rang.
Oh, no worries.
So a bishop's entire life is surrounded by canon law. He, as a Catholic, you probably wouldn't. Well, you do, Will, but many people don't think about how canon law intersects literally every part of their life. But I guess on a daily basis, it can change. So, I mean, if you want to think of it this way, with my role at the diocese, I'm kind of like the general counsel for canon law. If you know what a general counsel does for a corporation or a diocese. But any question about any part of the law, I could be asked at any time. But that could be anything from, right now, we're getting on to Easter. So a lot of people who have things about, is their baptism valid from a Protestant church or some other type of ecclesial community. So we investigate validity of baptism, complicated marriage histories, you name it. Who needs to do a profession of faith? What does a priest have the faculties or the jurisdiction or power to confect a particular sacrament? Confirmation is very complicated. So I get all those questions, particularly now and September-ish, quite frequently. But then I also do a lot of things like religious law, for example, religious groups, so sisters and religious sisters or brothers. They have their constitutions and statutes are their law. And then there's also law about, becoming religious, taking vows or promises. What is a vow? What is a promise? All that kind of stuff is governed by canon law. So I do a lot of religious law. A big thing in the Diocese of Phoenix is our Eastern Catholics. There are, most people don't know when they think East, they think Orthodox, but that's not what we're talking about. These are in union with Rome, and we don't need to go down that complicated line of, unless you want to.
Well, I actually did that as well a couple episodes ago. Awesome. I had a Maronite sister on. We talked about at least the Maronite rite, and
fantastic.
It's come up a few other times. I think I did an episode from way back. So for those who are listening, if you're interested, just go to gooddistinctions.com and type in Eastern, and I think I have an entire write-up and episode just about the 23 sui juris churches. So
awesome. And way to say it correctly. Awesome. But yeah, so I do Eastern stuff all the time. People changing churches. I get bi-ritual faculties for priests who are helping us in the diocese. All the time. It would, just because we're just such an international and diverse community here in Phoenix. Also buying and selling in the church. So I help a lot with if we need to do a lease of grounds for whatever. That's all in canon law. And that's one thing that brings me to reminds me of, I should say, is the church always lives in two realities, both the canonical and the civil. So you might think, well, buying and selling, well, that's contracts and that's stuff with civil lawyers. Well, yeah, it is, but we have to do it according to our own laws as well. So those types of situations would be both with me and the civil attorney about how we would drop contracts or approval for purchasing. So if a church wants to build something in there or sell something, there's certain approvals that have to be done by canon law, and we have to work in both worlds all the time. So that can be very complicated. And then finally, I guess, penal side of things. So priests and deacons who get in trouble. So we do prosecute them. They're our own system of courts and laws. They might be prosecuted civilly. They might not. Some things that we consider to be crimes are not crimes in civil law. And vice versa, actually. So anytime somebody gets in trouble, and we are all human, then there's going to be a canonical giving you generic situations, but it's so varied. And because there's even special laws, like, let's say, when the Pope was elected 10 years ago now, 11 years ago now, all of that is governed by canon law. Like, I remember when everybody was talking in the news, oh, we don't know what's going on in the conclave. Yeah, we do. Like, there's a
pretty
book
clear, yeah,
that says, like, when they're supposed to pray, when they're supposed to break. Like, we know exactly what they're doing. We don't know what they're saying, but they better be following what's in, the law, because it's all governed by canon law. So it's basically those inner workings behind the scene that your average Catholic doesn't know is there, but is there.
Well, I was going to make a sarcastic comment that I'll say anyway, because why not? All priests are experts in canon law, so I'm not really sure why you exist in this diocesan role, because every priest knows all the answers to every theological question, know exactly what's happening canonically.
Sure.
But so that was the sarcastic comment.
Yeah.
The actual question is, how much do priests actually get trained in this?
It depends, is the obvious Catholic answer. Yes or no, maybe, and it depends. I mean, guys that were ordained, many, many years ago now probably didn't get a lot. It's only been in the last, I'd say 20 years that faculties have just made a more concerted effort to have more canon law. They might have had an intro class. I think every priest should have had at least an intro class. But now you're seeing, like St. John Vianney Seminary in Denver, you get an intro, you get a sacraments and a marriage class. So that's 3. So that's the most I've ever heard. When I studied at the Angelicum, which was the STB faculty with, all the seminarians, it was 2. It was the intro and sacraments. But canon law, if you go on to get the degree in canon law, is a 3-year degree. So having 2 classes is not really learning the breadth of canon law, so to speak.
Yeah, it seems to me like, and this is just my perception as a layperson, not a canonist by any means, I look at the code pretty often. I have no reason to, other than I'm curious. It's not like I'm carrying out any of these things, but sometimes the teens will ask me a question at school, or oftentimes it's my coworkers and I having theological conversations about whatever. And would this be valid? I don't know. Let's look. And so we'll go and check it out. But for those who are especially pastors, I feel like reading the code at the very least would be an ideal situation. I mean, if you had, obviously you'd want every priest to read the whole code, but like, what would your recommendation be for those who are priests who are listening maybe? How can they kind of get their feet wet? Because it's not something you just sit down and read cover to cover.
No. And I don't know that I'd even recommend that. I would, first of all, if you are living in a diocese where training is offered, to take it. Then you're going to know what's maybe more applicable for your particular area and what the focus is there. Like our nullity minister training, we give quite a bit of canon law in that. If you're a pastor, it's going to look different than if you're a parochial vicar. If you're a pastor, you have to know that everything you do every day is going to have something to do with canon law. Like you're buying, selling, you need to renovate, you're accepting donations. Those very basic things are all governed by canon law. And again, hopefully your diocese is providing you with good information that way. And then just know who your local canon lawyer is. Again, I remember in my theology studies, and I think it was sacramental theology class. It wasn't even a canon law class. The professor's like, and blah, 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 blah. This is all canon law. And he was going through it very thoroughly. He's like, but at the end of the day, just know who your canon lawyer is. Like, I'm telling you this information, but you want to check because, like, for example, confirmation is super complicated. And so if you don't have a handle on that, the sacrament can be invalid. So, and it's not just because you didn't read the rite correctly, it's you didn't maybe have the faculty to do it, and now this guy isn't confirmed. So, but, I definitely recommend getting your feet wet with canon law. It is approachable. I think in the old days, people thought it wasn't approachable or it wasn't pastoral.
Mhm.
And I don't know what could be more pastoral than the salvation of souls. So I'm just putting that out there. Um, it's not there to here. I'll give you another example. When I was studying theology in Rome, one of my friends who was a seminarian for a diocese in the United States was already starting canon law, and he knew that I was interested in canon law. And I said, well, how is it going? You know, I was really excited, and tell me how it's going. He's like, Nicole, it's just learning the exceptions. It's all a bunch of exceptions. And though that's a bit of a stretch, it
Mhm.
is not completely inaccurate, because it really does allow for the human experience and what's going on with that person, because we're dealing with the salvation of souls. So where the law allows for movement or dispensation or discretion, it's for good reason, and going beyond that would be going beyond good reason and for
Mhm.
their salvation. And so just kind of having those boundaries is always good for any priest to have. Because if you go beyond the boundaries, you're probably not going to help that person, and you might be getting yourself into trouble as well. But we're really concerned about the person that he's ministering to. There is some, like, sorry to back up on you, but I still, even though Pope Francis has promulgated so many laws, this is now not 100% accurate, but this commentary is still the commentary I use. And it
Mhm.
was just an FYI, of the three people who edited it, the only one who's still alive is John Beale, and he's working on the update of this actually as we speak.
Nice.
Which will be awesome. But that was definitely written for not necessarily canon lawyers, but pastoral ministers. The commentary is very approachable. And so if there's a situation in your parish and you're like, I don't know how to deal with, whatever. Yeah, try reading it, and then, taking it to your local canon lawyer and saying, hey, am I reading this right? Is this how I should do this? And that would be great, because if you are especially a priest or deacon and you've studied a little theology, because you do need to have that's the background of all our canon law is theology, which is why in order to study canon law you have to have a master's or equivalent in theology. Is you understand the why behind the law. It's good to know the how, like, how does this flesh itself out? How do I do this on a day-to-day basis? And
Mhm.
think of it as a fun endeavor to learn to reading the law, as opposed to, I think, like I said, people were maybe not afraid of it, but just say that harder that it was. I don't know. I'm nervous. I don't know what the reason why, but I think the more you look at it, the more approachable you know that it is, and helpful.
It seems like that you might have stumbled across one of the major issues is seeing pastorality versus canon law or doctrine as being opposed somehow, which is ridiculously counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
And the law does certainly allow for a lot of exceptions, which the one that always stood out to me, and especially my students, is baptism. The fact that the minister of baptism could be anyone that intends what the church intends.
Right.
So if you desire baptism and there's water there and you have an atheist, the atheist can baptize someone.
That's
I
right.
mean, that just shows the wideness of God's mercy.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that's not the norm. That's not what we want. And I think this is where people get into trouble who don't have the law, especially our separated brethren in the Protestant ecclesial communities, because they want to follow Christ. They want to exude the charity of God. But sometimes that mercy becomes imprudence, almost to the extent of leading them the wrong direction.
Right.
And that's where I'm from North Carolina. So I have a lot of Baptist friends in particular. And they're like, so ragging on the Catholic Church for having laws and regulations, and why do you have laws for everything? It's like, well, because we need them. We need those guidelines. We need those boundaries. Also, one of the things that I think is so funny is everything in the code is there for a reason. That this something had to have happened in the past that it now is in there. So because there's some really funny stuff that comes up. You read it and you're like, why is this possibly in there?
Yep. We had it. I always say this wasn't about a bunch of monks just trying to be creative, in the dark monastery that they were living in. This is law, even in civil jurisdictions, is a reaction to a problem that you want to avoid. So yes, if it's in the code, it's happened, and we're anticipating it happening again.
I mean, North Carolina civil law, there was a law still on the books that you can't plow your field with an elephant. And it's like, why is that in there? When in the world was there an elephant in North Carolina that somebody decided, let's put a plow on the back of this thing? But the fact is they did. So that's fun.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of neat things in there, but yeah, it doesn't have to be like these crazy dramatic things that people bring up to canonists. I mean, I know when I was working in the parish, one of the big projects that we had a couple of years before I left parish ministry was splitting one parish with two churches into two separate parishes.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, oh, that should be pretty easy. It was not at all. And so I know there was multiple emails back and forth between us, like, what the heck do we do now?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's it's so interesting to see how the interplay between civil and ecclesial realities is. Off the top of your head, are there any, you mentioned crimes that the church has that the civil society doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
What would an example of that be?
Well, in the Latin code and in the Eastern code as well, a priest living in concubinage with a woman. It's a crime.
Right, because it's not a crime in civil law because they don't care.
Nope.
Right. Interesting.
Sins against the sixth commandment with an adult
Gotcha.
is a crime in canon law. The minors would be in both civil and canon law, but we have the adult as well.
So what does that look like in terms of criminal prosecution? Do you call it prosecution? Like what does that look like? Generally speaking. Generally speaking.
So yeah, there is a process. And just for the record too, we've always had this process. This isn't new, since Pope Francis or even since the 2000s. We've always had these processes to prosecute criminals, but whether they were used is the question. Okay. So again, I just want to set the record straight. We haven't just all of a sudden created all of these processes, right? So it looks a lot like, a criminal case in civil law. We always start with a preliminary investigation to make sure that there's something to actually investigate. You are innocent until proven otherwise, just like everybody else. And just because somebody gets accused of something doesn't mean that it's real. So we do what's called a preliminary investigation to see if there's, the word in Latin is fumus, there's something there to investigate. It's not through the investigation, we don't make a decision. It's just, okay, well, this seems like a legitimate claim. We'll move forward. Okay. And so we have somebody who's the prosecutor for the bishop, and that is our promoter of justice. Every diocese has a diocesan prosecutor. We just call him the promoter of justice. And he does just that. He's promoting justice for the accused, justice for the victim, making sure that we as a diocese are doing procedurally what we need to do. And just like every other legal system, we are needing to protect the rights of everyone. And that's why you have a process. And I think people need to understand, again, canon law isn't just there to shackle people. It's there to protect rights. Because if you don't follow the process, somebody's rights will get trampled. Either the priest being accused, the victim who didn't have her day in court or his day in court or whatever. So it's really important that all those safeguards are managed. So we investigate, we interview people, there are witnesses, the whole 9 yards. And then decisions are made. Who makes the decision depends upon the crime. Some things a diocesan bishop can handle locally. Other crimes are reserved to different courts in Rome. So we have special law that tells us, okay, for this crime, you need to go here. For this crime, you need to go here, type of thing. The most serious ones like child sex abuse and things like that go to Rome. Other things can be done locally. But the big thing I want to stress is I think a lot of people, especially in America, don't understand that there is a difference, and a very distinct difference, between sin and crime. Some things that a priest would do, for example, are not a crime, but they are a sin. And so the results are very different. And, we, again, pastoral salvation of souls. There are things that we do that are medicinal. We want people to reform. We want people to convert We want people to repent, and we want them to get to heaven. And knowing that that is the aim of the law, I think helps understand where we're coming from, that there is a difference between sin and crime. So, for example, a priest, because this happens, has sex with a woman one time. That is not a crime. That is a sin. If after warning, he will not stop a relationship with a woman, is living with her, he's causing scandal, that's when we get into crime. Okay. So there are different levels of behavior that lead to different effects or how we would deal with them. But I have to remind, when I train different boards or different review groups, there is a difference between sin and crime. Sin doesn't show up in civil law. So that's a little hard for some people, especially when I have civil attorneys or judges who are sitting on these boards, and they have to be like, sin, we don't deal with sin. Well, we're the church. We absolutely deal with sin. So knowing that is super important as well.
One of the distinctions of that between crime and sin that comes up a lot, at least in what I see in Catholic media, is heresy, right? You can hold a heretical opinion, but that doesn't make you a criminal heretic, right? There is a difference.
Right.
And it also depends if you have the authority to say whether someone has committed said crime or not.
Right. Well, even I think people get confused too. I got this just last week. They think not being able to receive communion means you're excommunicated.
I was going to ask you about that next. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, here we go.
On that.
Yeah. So excommunication is a penalty for a crime. Okay. So if you are excommunicated, you committed a crime. If you did something to commit, again, this is the distinction, good distinction, between sin and crime. You commit a sin that puts your mortal soul in danger, but isn't to the level of a crime, you may not be able to receive communion. But there's many reasons why every Sunday or daily mass or whatever, we don't receive communion. That's a conscience issue and something that's reserved to the confessional. But excommunication is a penalty for a crime.
So is there a distinction between someone who is told by his local ordinary, maybe, you are not to present yourself for Holy Communion because you are manifestly, like say a politician, because this comes up a lot, you're manifestly saying things that are contrary to the Catholic faith, grave matters involved, and you're unrepentant, both in the privacy of the confessional as well as publicly. Say they do repent, they go to confession. Obviously, there is a need. Is there a need for public recanting of those positions because it's a political figure? Right? Because a lot of people, the reason I'm asking this is some people will say, well, that person's pro-choice, like they shouldn't be going to communion. And then somebody says, you don't know what they said in the confessional. Like, fair enough. But this is a public figure that manifestly put an error out there.
Right. So the short answer, well, there isn't a short answer. So if you are excommunicated, let's talk about the crime and the punishment. And that is declared by canon law. When that's remitted, that has to be public. Okay. Because it was publicly declared, then it needs to be publicly remitted so everybody's on the same page. Canon 915 is what you're talking about in regard to people who are sin. They shouldn't be approaching communion because of their public sin or whatever. There isn't a thing that says, therefore, then we need to publicly say you're no longer sinning. Because I get what you're saying. Hopefully that politician, because he is a public figure with the promptings of his pastor, if he does convert, will make that public on his own, but the church would not require of that. There's matters of conscience and things like that. And we don't require people to tell us what they said in confession. In fact, we don't want to do that.
Right.
But hopefully their voting preferences would speak for themselves. Hopefully if they have a true conversion, they would not be afraid to say, I've had a conversion and this is now how I'm going to be voting. But I don't know that we could require them to do that. The other thing is, and I think people miss this part about actually what the canon says. And if you could let me read you the canon. It's actually not saying that the person should not present themselves to communion. It's actually saying that the minister of communion should deny the sacrament.
Oh, wow. That's very different.
So let me read it. Those who have been excommunicated or interdicted after the imposition or declaration of the penalty. Okay, so that's penalty. And others obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. So the onus is on the minister of communion.
Interesting.
Okay. So when I taught a class for, or like a little seminar for Dr. Eric Westby, and I brought that up, and because that part of it was heresy and things like that. And I said, I'm not a big fan of being an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion because I'm aware of that canon.
Right.
And I don't want to deal with that because I know too much. And I also believe that our ordinary ministers need to be the ones who have that obligation, and extraordinary ministers really, we can get on that conversation, but that's actually what it's saying is if a certain person presents themselves for communion, you are to deny them, minister.
Interesting. I've had pastors talk to me about it, and they say, well, if somebody comes up and they're wearing a Planned Parenthood t-shirt, then I would refuse them communion. But short of that, I probably wouldn't. Well, all right. Because it's up to them. As you say, the onus is on them. But when it comes to manifest grave error on a very, very public scale, like Joe Biden in the State of the Union address, talking about his abortion-related policies, there's no way to square that with a good, clean conscience. So it's not really it's not like you or I or anyone else is saying we're judging their soul. Like it's not that, but we can look at actions objectively and say, this is wrong and here's why. And it's important to sift through that.
Right.
But it seems, so what is the priest doing in that case? Is he withholding communion pursuant to that canon because of, is it a judgment of action or is it a judgment of that person's, the state of their soul?
Well, we are never, so what does St. Augustine say? I think it's St. Augustine, that when we receive the Eucharist unworthily, what is it? Do you know? Help me out here, Will.
Well, I know it's St. Paul says we eat or drink judgment upon ourselves.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I think Augustine kind of fleshes that out even more.
It's like but judgment.
Yeah,
we're judging
so
ourselves.
It's actually worse to receive communion when your soul's in a state of peril than not receiving at all. So, everything, again, going back to the whole medicinal nature of the church and salvation of souls, the people are like, well, what's the big deal? They're receiving Jesus, blah, 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 blah. But if we don't have consequences for our actions, we don't tend to learn, right? Like you're a father. I'm a mother. If I just let my children do whatever the heck they wanted all the time and didn't give them the opportunity to learn because I just didn't want to hurt their feelings, they're going to end up being horrible humans.
Yep.
And that's not good for them or society. So when the church says, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can't receive communion because that's important that you don't do X, Y, and Z, that should mean something. And that's why the church does it. It's Holy Mother Church. Mother. If the church is being a good parent, they show their children the best way of doing things. And if the church is saying, by you doing this, you can't receive communion, it's probably for a good reason. And maybe that should make you stop and think that maybe I need to amend something so that my salvation is not at stake. I mean, it really is that simple. I mean,
obedience is incredibly undervalued in our society, and it's also unfortunately undervalued in the church today, especially in America. But we absolutely need to step up and realize that we're not God. We don't speak with the authority of God. But hey, the church does, so we should listen to the wisdom of Holy Mother Church.
That's right.
Well, I think that's as good a place to end today as we could hope for. So I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on. Thanks for all that you do day in and day out to keep us upright, seaworthy in the diocese. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you for having me on. And any other time you want to talk canon law, you let me know.
Perfect. We'll have to talk about annulments more in detail and
juicy
just validity of sacraments. I do have some related questions about sedevacantism in particular. So I'd love to talk about that too.
Sure.
So, but that'll be another day.
All righty. Sounds great. Great.
Thanks so much, Nicole, for coming on. And those who are listening, please go to gooddistinctions.com, subscribe for free, and help support the show. That would be very much appreciated. Again, it's gooddistinctions.com. Nicole, thanks again.
Thank you, Will.